Ya viene la revolución, para que se asustan será para mejor. Es el pueblo entero el que ya está gritando, ¡viva la revolución!
Iranian nuclear weapons development.
They have turned the island into a communist hellhole.
The experiment in Venezuela has failed completely.
La bestialidad imperialista. Bestialidad que no tiene una frontera determinada ni pertenece a un país determinado. Bestias fueron las hordas hitleristas, como bestias son los norteamericanos hoy, como bestias son los paracaidistas belgas, como bestias fueron los imperialistas franceses en Argelia. Porque es la naturaleza del imperialismo la que bestializa a los hombres, la que la convierte en fieras sedientas de sangre que están dispuestas a degollar, a asesinar, a destruir hasta la última imagen de un revolucionario, de un partidario de un régimen que haya caído bajo su bota o que luche por su libertad. Y la estatua que recuerda a Lumumba, hoy destruida pero mañana reconstruida, nos recuerda también en la historia trágica de ese mártir de la revolución del mundo, que no se puede confiar en el imperialismo, pero ni tantito así, nada.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 29 of Unmasking Imperialism, exposing imperialist propaganda in mainstream media. Today, debunking China's so-called ban against quote-unquote sissy men and quote-unquote effeminate men. It's been making the rounds in all of the mainstream media publications, along with the usual nonsense stories that people are eating animals in DPRK and that people are starving in Cuba and that Venezuela's economy is failing and all of the other nonsense we see. But I found this one to be really interesting because it touches on a broader topic affecting young people all over the world, especially young men, which is video game addiction, media, our relationship with media. I know we're using media right now to have this conversation, but it's something that we have to understand, provide a Marxist analysis of digital technology and alienation under late stage capitalism. And joining me today is good comrade Carl Za, host of Silk and Steel podcast, which focuses on China and surrounding regions, history, culture, and politics. If you want a great understanding of China, the Belt and Road Initiative, of China's internationalism, the antidote to a lot of the lies claiming that China is imposing debt traps around the world, I highly suggest Silk and Steel podcast. Very optimistic podcast as well. A lot of leftist podcasts out there are like, oh my God, we're going to die, everything's over. And Carl and his podcast does a great job of showing how China, the Communist Party of China and socialism with Chinese characteristics, is doing some really groundbreaking and inspiring stuff. So I just wanted to plug that. How's it going, Carl?
Hey, how are you, sir?
Good. I'm doing well, man. And by the way, I had a great time speaking with you and comrade Dust James. Shout out to Dust who's watching and listening. We did a stream a few weeks ago in defense of China's Communist Party. I highly suggest you all check that out on the anniversary of China and the people's the Communist Party. So I highly suggest that. And it seems like every day the propaganda war against China is ramping up. And one of the tactics and strategies that has been increasingly used against China is imposing Western liberal values and making it seem like China is sexist, like it's oppressing women, it's oppressing young people. And I've seen this narrative with this whole China banning, quote, sissy men story that I've been seeing everywhere in mainstream media. And once again, the Western imperialist media using their own values that are not Chinese values, not Chinese morals, to try to attack the Chinese people. So I wanted to get straight into that, and also later on talk about isolation, addiction, alienation under late stage capitalism. Before I show you all an article that was published by Variety, a mainstream publication magazine, slamming China for this ban. Carl, I don't know, what was your reaction to the story and your analysis of it?
The English media reporting of China is very, very little, contains very little nuance or context, right? And the intention is clear. They're trying to paint with a broad brush about China as China as a fascist dictatorship where most reactionary shit happens. This is for people who actually been to China, who actually lived in China. They will tell you that couldn't be further from the truth. And I guess that's why we're here today to really delve into the issue and to tell people what is really like, right?
Yeah, most definitely. And one thing, me and my girlfriend visited China in 2019, and one of the things we noticed is that it is extremely equal among the sexes, among men and women. You see women in high positions of power. You see men in high positions of power. You see women out in the streets. One thing that I thought was really cool in Beijing specifically was that we would walk around and we would see these huge dance parties late at night, 8, 9 o'clock. It was like Zumba dancing, and it was all led by women. It was also helped organized by the government, and just so many programs for women led by women, that to claim that China is sexist, that it's discriminating, is just ridiculous. Because like you said, once you actually go there, experience it for yourself, you see not only how equal it is for all sexes, but also politically, economically, how much empowered people are, both men and women. So it's something that I really compel people to actually go to China and see it for yourself. But there's this article, this is from Variety magazine, mainstream liberal publication. It's called "China Wants Sissy Idols and, quote, effeminate men scrubbed from entertainment industry." Shows a big scary picture of Xi Jinping. I mean, look at the picture. This is like the worst picture they could use of him, right?
Did they do some Photoshop around the back? I mean, because I can see the Xi Jinping image, but what is with all that red stuff? I think they did it on purpose. Looks like there's like blood flowing out of
right. It makes it look like he's like eating babies or something, and some burial site.
yeah, exactly.
It's a horrible it's a horrible photoshopped image, and
again,
I mean, those subtleties, right? That just seeing that a headline and an image.
Yeah. So first, I just want to get it out there. China is not banning sissy men from the entertainment industry. Let's just get that out of the way. One of the most, there's all kind of crazy things on the internet, like China is banning femboys, China is banning effeminate men. Look, one of the China's most famous celebrity is Jinxin, and she is she's transgendered, and she transitioned. I think she transitioned. I think 20 years ago, and she was actually started out as in the PLA. She was
wow.
like in her previous life. He was she was a PLA soldier, and at one point she decided to transition, and then she became one of the China's famous celebrity, and she has her own show, Jinxin Show, which she's known for her very acidic remarks at these talent shows. It's like she's a host of a talent show, and she will be acting like what's that British guy on American Idol?
Ryan Seacrest? No, Simon Cowell, that really rude guy.
So, yes, so her style is like that. She will, but she's insanely popular, and there's no plans to take her off the air. And another very popular celebrity is Li Yugang is very famous for cross-dressing on stage, in his performance. And there's Li Yugang is not going to be off the stage anytime soon in China, and he's also another very, very famous celebrity. What the current Chinese regulation is targeting, though, is targeting a specific group of celebrities. They're targeting a specific aesthetics, and they're talking about the K-pop aesthetics that started to come to China with the popularity of K-pop in more recent years. And what happened in China is that, along with the open and reform and the introduction of market economy, what happens is in capitalism, people, once people see something makes money, and there's like a rush into copycatting the same tactics. So that's what happened with popularity with K-pop when it was introduced into China. Then the host of the Chinese, the whole of Chinese entertainment industry now suddenly shifted, trying to copycat the K-pop and all the K-pop aesthetics, with very pretty boys and so forth. So this is what this conversation about regulating the celebrity culture and entertainment industry was actually not new in China. This started back in 2018. So back then, the Chinese state TV, CCTV, published an editorial. It says, we shouldn't allow this kind of imported aesthetics to dominate the airwave and dominate all the entertainment industry in China, and not setting up a correct role model for the Chinese youth. But they use a derogatory word, "liang pao," which in Western press is translated into "sissy man." So in response, the People's Daily, another official mouthpiece of China, published a counter editorial, and it says we should not use that word "liang pao." We should not use the word "sissy man" because it is derogatory. But if you actually read I read the content of both editorials. First, China people are very confused. It's like, why there's fighting between CCTV and People's Daily, right? Aren't both of them supposed to be the mouthpiece of the Chinese government, right? Yeah. Because in people's mind, China is this like monolith with like very efficient very efficiently oiled machine that with Xi Jinping snap of a finger from Xi Jinping, everything gets propagated to the bottom, right? That's not how it goes. China, just like any large society, is composed of a huge amount of people and different bureaucracy, different agencies, people with widely different ideas. I need to get that into people's heads. That's why we have this even editorial fight between two ostensibly mouthpiece of the Chinese government and Chinese Communist Party. You have the CCTV on one hand and People's Daily on the other hand. I managed to read both editorial, but what I've came out with that is that the actual content of the editorial was actually not so much different. It's that People's Daily editorial clarify a lot of things. What the People's Daily editorial is said is, you agree with the CCTV that the Chinese entertainment industry needs to be regulated. We should not allow capital to set the standards for our youth, right? But what it says then is we should not use derogatory words like "liang pao," like "sissy man." And People's Daily editorial specifically said the different gender expressions among general public should be respected. That's a very powerful statement coming from People's Daily. So what this says is this debate and also this most recent regulation is specifically targeted toward the entertainment industry. It's not like China is cracking down on gender expression, right? It's not like you can do whatever you want. But what they're concerned about is kind of this industry-wide rush to adopt the K-pop standards, K-pop aesthetics, and let's face it. Like K-pop is great. It offered a alternative to the Western, a purely Western pop. But at the same time, K-pop industry is very toxic. I mean, people can do research in that, Google that, and how that K-pop industry is being, how talents are being groomed. I intentionally use that word groom, and people can do research into that. So that's what the current Chinese regulation is aiming towards. But again, I'm not saying there's no like social conservatives in China, right? Because like I said, China is a huge country. There's 1.4 billion people. There's probably 1.4 billion opinions. And I want to give people a more social historical context. I'm a little bit old. I was born in 1976 in China, and in 1982, when I went to first grade in China, this was the time China first experienced a reform opening. And I had this conversation with my classmates, first graders. We're saying, oh, okay, now everything is opening up. Could we imagine, like, sometimes in the future when we grow up, we will be able to do PDA? We will be able to hold girls' hand in public. Like, we would be able to even kissing in the street. Would you do that? I mean, that tells you how much the world has changed in China from 1982 to 2021. So, you have my generation. I say China is every 10 years is a generation, because China changes so fast. Right. Not just a physical change, that we can see with high-speed rail, with whole different cities popping up, but the social change as well. So you have to think about my generation experienced that kind of rapid change. What about my parents' generation, right? The youth of China today, the people who are born in 90s and 2000, they have a totally different mindset. Multiple survey has done in China that shows the Chinese youth acceptance of homosexuality is very high. In fact, the acceptance of different gender expressions among the Chinese youth is very high. But that might not be the case to like an older generation, right? And to just more emphasis on this generation clash, I on my old podcast Clash actually interview a Chinese student who participated in the 1986 Chinese student protest in Shanghai. That's one of the kind of the first large-scale Chinese student protests in China since the Cultural Revolution. And he told me how it got started. In 1986, there was a famous American band. I have to look up which band now, because he was actually a famous band. They came to Shanghai to perform. And during the performance, they were inviting these young people to come up to stage to dance with them. And this was 1986. The security who were provided at the concert, they're super paranoid, and they don't want they don't want anything to happen to these American guests. So they start dragging people off the stage and detaining people. And so a lot of young people got really fed up with this kind of with this really suffocating a tactic. So they started a protest. This was the start of 1986 Chinese student protest in Shanghai. This is actually the predecessor to the eventual 1989 Tiananmen protest. But this is that kind of shows you kind of the generation gap also between the Chinese students in 1986 and the older generation who are more socially conservative, right? I mean, like, in 1980s, even like mixed gender dancing in China in like private party was something that's to be frowned upon in some circles. Right. So imagine the the people, the conservatives in 1980s, that would be my parents or maybe my grandparents' generation, who are now in 2021 and looking at all these changes in China, and they will, there's a huge, let me just say, there's a huge generation gap in China. Okay, in terms of social issues, and people in charge people in the censor board stuff, they are usually older. They're usually even an older generation than me. I'm born in 1976. People who are like at the top level of the government right now, they're more like my parents' generation, right? So there's already like kind of there's that generation difference. So that's why you will see sometimes these kind of social conservative attitude sentiment gets leaked out into editorial, even state media editorial, right? When people use words like "niangpao," "sissy man," right. But that actually caused a huge backlash on social media in China. A lot of people criticize this use. They felt that it was inappropriate for state media to use that kind of language. Again,
really fascinating.
Yeah, and again, China is not a monolith. It's composed of different generations. It's composed of 1.4 billion people, everyone with a different opinion. But we what we do know is that the current regulation is very specific. It's specifically targeting the entertainment industry. And in the recent press release from when the Chinese so the Chinese censor board, when they met with all the industry with all the big entertainment companies, they basically lay out the ground rules, and they specifically said they don't want the capital to dictate aesthetics. They don't want the capital to determine the role models for our youth, and so this is what this means. Again, this is China, so different kind of regulations come out, and then sometimes this regulation could change within a month. To give an example for people who are interested in the Chinese entertainment industry, in 2019 there was a edict from the Chinese censor board that says, no more custom period dramas, no more period dramas. Like the TVs need to limit the airing of period drama to like 15% of the content in the golden hour. So people are like, oh no, this is what's going on. And then that ban was lifted like a month later in April 2019. And what ended up happening was the agreement among the Chinese censor board and all the media companies that they will submit their scripts and their schedules for approval. So he added an additional regulatory process. That's what ended up happening. So I suspect this is probably will be the result of this current round of regulation. There will be more regulation. There will be more eyeballs on the entertainment industry, and I think that's also because the Chinese government have felt kind of the Chinese entertainment industry has grown a lot in the last 10-15 years, and they felt a lot of the development has gotten out of the hand. I don't know if people saw the news. The Chinese fans of BT, so Chinese fans of BTS is the K-pop band. They did a crowdfunding on Weibo to get the BTS idol a customized airplane for his birthday.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that was big news. So in the end, Weibo shut down they muted the fan account for 15 days. So they're not allowed to post because first of all, a lot of the K-pop fandoms, they're minors. They're usually teenagers, and and that they're using their parents' money to to do all these things. So first of all, that's not something that their parents' generation look kindly upon. And so that this is why you see some of these regulations coming out of China. It's a reaction to some of the thing that's been happening. So some people feel like all these things are getting out of hand. They have BTS fans buying up ad space in New York Times Square, and Chinese fans, this Chinese K-pop fans buying up ad space in New York Times Square to celebrate their idol's birthday.
Totally out of hand, but it just shows like how you were saying that China is doing a better job at not allowing their civilization, their people, to be dominated by capital. And I just want to read off a few good quotes and comments from people in the chat. Shout out to everybody who's watching and listening. By the way, Big Teal said, China is not a monolith. Mainstream media has no nuanced analysis about the complexity of Chinese government, culture, politics. Totally agree. That's exactly right. They make it seem like how you were saying earlier, Carl, that Xi Jinping snaps his fingers and everything is an agreement. Everyone thinks exactly the same. And it kind of harps on the same racist stereotypes about China being brainwashed, having, white people have inherent creativity and individuality, and Asians are just brainwashed. We've heard that expression that they use called hive mind to describe China. And it's just really disgusting. And this is just another example of that. And also, Big Teal's mentioning, I like K-pop music, but it's super exploitative. And Dust James said, K-pop, very convenient for the CIA's objective to glorify South Korea. And it's really true, because in many ways, K-pop has been used to fluff up and promote capitalism and neoliberalism in South Korea. And just to kind of glorify capitalism, glorify superficiality. I also find it interesting that of all the Asian countries, South Korea, occupied Korea has the lighter skinned actors, and they use these whitening creams. And I feel like in the Chinese media, I see people of all backgrounds, all colors, all genders. And it's one of those things that I think is really interesting to see, because we also have something very similar in Latin America and Latin American media, where they promote just the lighter skinned, whiter Latinos and purposely eliminate indigenous and Afro-descended Latinos from media. So it's interesting to see that. But I just want to read some of this article. China, again, this is from Variety. China wants, quote, sissy idols and, quote, feminine men scrubbed from entertainment industry. Chinese government's crackdown on the tech and entertainment sectors has now turned to, quote, sissy idols, quote, effeminate men, and all things, quote, overly entertaining. The measures were sketched out in an 8-point plan on Thursday by the National Radio and Television Administration. It called for further regulation of arts and entertainment shows and related personnel. Announcing the measures, the Communist Party of China's propaganda department accused some in the entertainment industry of bad influence on the young and of the, quote, severely polluting the social atmosphere. One of the 8 sections to one, boycotting being overly entertaining, explaining a need to put more emphasis on, quote, traditional Chinese culture, revolutionary culture, and socialist culture, as if that was a bad thing, right? It said that authorities will establish a correct beauty standard and boycott vulgar internet celebrities. So there's some more stuff on it. They also add here, it also called for Chinese media to spread more positive values and for trade associations in the television and internet entertainment sectors to provide more training and self-discipline. And they also talk about bans on idol audition shows. And I think it kind of touches on something broader. One of my favorite quotes that I like to mention a lot is Malcolm X saying that the media is the most powerful entity on earth. It has the power to make you think your friends are your enemies and your enemies are your friends. And in many ways, it also can create new religions. How you were talking about earlier, how they raised all this money for these random pop idols. I mean, that just shows you like the power of media and how propaganda can be used to create a new religion, a new hierarchy in society that is against socialism, against human beings, against society. And I think that it's great that China is taking measures to promote culture and revolutionary socialist culture, because in other parts of the world, especially in countries that are dominated by neoliberalism and capitalism, we see the traditional cultures being wiped away slowly. It's a silent genocide of culture being wiped out, traditional garb. And by dominating mainstream media, these capitalist elites are able to influence and change cultures and impose their style of dressing and make that seem like the normative the normative good behavior or way to look. And I think it's really cool to see that China is taking steps to preserve it.
That's a great point, because like people, the liberal media is presenting this as a case of China cracking down on different expressions, right? But if you look at what they're actually targeting, like right now, there's a aesthetics called little fresh meat in China, 小鲜肉, and it's all these like the same K-pop pretty voiced aesthetic. It's the same aesthetic. It's not like there's a different expression, like a different standards of beauty that's blossoming in the entertainment industry. Because the religion of capitalism is really about making money. And what happened is, when people see, oh, K-pop is popular, K-pop is making money, let's copy that, and that's exactly what happened. And Chinese netizens, actually had a fascinating discussion on this issue as well. They say, if we look at all these the U.S. celebrities, the celebrity in the West, very often they wear next to nothing. Is it really because that's they're trying to that's really their own inner expression, their self-individualist expression, or they are presenting them a certain way to please their audience, to appeal to the lowest common denominator? I think that's a fair point, and that's people don't the underlying the premises that all these literal media talking points not addressing is capitalism is actually very homogenizing.
Of course.
That's why we've seen this kind of what happened with the most recent rounds of globalization, right? All the even K-pop is just like Western culture with a Korean packaging, like, because K-pop industry, often they see what's popular, what dance is popular in US, in the West, and they go that, and then they do their own little thing. So what Chinese government want is, they don't want capital to dictate the direction of their society. They don't want the Chinese youth to become slaves to what the capitals is selling to them, right? And like that. So this is why also this is being attacked by all the liberal media in the West, because that's what they want. The whole idea of liberal capitalism is they wanted to have the market to dominate everything, right? And they present it as, that's people's choice. But is it really, if you think about it, is it like what all these media images we've been bombarded in the West, is that really like everybody's choice, or is that just what they think they can, that's what they sells more product to you? Like,
of course.
So
yeah, that's a great point about liberal Western capitalism being homogenizing, because the irony is that Western liberal imperialists claim that the Western imperialist capitalist countries are unique and individual, and everyone follows their own path, and we all have our own style, and it's all the same style. You see hipsters in the US and Germany, they all wear the same crap, they all listen to the same music, they all are brainwashed by the same media outlets, and it accuses the enemy because it doesn't understand that in China, even within China, there are multiple different nationalities, people, languages, cultures, forms of dressing, and it doesn't understand that, and it just comes with this arrogance and ignorance of saying our way is better, and you guys are all just brainwashed and all doing the same thing. And it's part of the ongoing culture war that goes on between the West and anti-imperialist countries around the world. And talking on what you're saying about isolation and alienation, one of the conversations that's important to raise as well is that all of this, I think, touches on the broader and more important subject of alienation under late-stage capitalism. Obviously, we find ourselves in the middle of the capitalist mode of production, where the means of production are owned and operated by a small elite who are in control of the means of production, the wealth of society, and the vast majority of people have to sell their labor and work for somebody else to survive, instead of being able to live their own lives and grow their own farms and have their own property that they can manage. And it's really sad to see that as part of our coping mechanism for alienation, especially young people, we turn to smartphone addiction, video game addiction, isolation, and it's an increasing problem not only in China but around the world, especially in hyper capitalist countries like the United States. You can't walk anywhere here in the US, go to a mall, and you'll see a group of young kids hanging out together, but they're not even talking to each other. They're all hunched over their phones. I remember growing up in the US when me and my friends would play in the street. We would have no cell phones. We would play with a trash can, a soccer ball. We would yell car, when a car was passing by. And that's part of the contradiction of capitalism. And Marx even talks about it in Capital, where he talks about technology being a double-edged sword, where, like, on the one hand, we shouldn't reject technology, right? We're not Luddites. We're not against technology. Like, we believe that technological advancements can help bring about socialism and communism, as we're seeing in China. But the double edge to it is that it can also be used against us to distract us. As Marx talks about in Capital, the producers bow down before their products. And I feel like so much of that is happening under late stage capitalism with technology. And I want to show you all a clip. I found this to be very fascinating. It's called Cell Phone Addiction. And it's a very short clip. It's like 2 minutes, but it's just an inside look into what cell phone addiction and digital isolation is in the 21st century. So I just want to play this, get your reaction, and maybe talk a little bit about how much of a problem this is around the world and how China is a model of combating this sort of thing. So I hate to be a bummer on this beautiful Saturday, but I think that video perfectly encapsulates what life is like in late stage capitalism with alienation, social media obsession. And again, this is something that is not only happening in China or in Asian countries, it's happening everywhere. Everywhere. This is a problem. Smartphone addiction. And that's not to say I myself am good at that as well. To a certain degree, I mean, even us now, we're using this technology. But I wanted to get your comment and reaction, Carl, on like just this general trend of alienation, especially with the pandemic, right? With COVID-19, the lockdowns, everyone's inside, not talking. What are some steps that China is taking to eliminate this, to eliminate social isolation and the negative impacts of digital addiction?
Well, alienation and atomization, it was a byproduct of industrial revolution, but it's also being actively promoted by capitalist societies because once we're atomized and individualized, it's a lot easier to break us down and sell us products. That's all what it was about, and that's. The difference is in China is the Chinese government saw that and they didn't want that to happen in China. And I want to address something about the internet gaming and the latest regulation in China. I saw many Western parents are saying, why can't we have that? Why can't we live? Because the regulation that says, it's put the restriction on the internet gaming company, on the big companies like Tencent, on NetEase, and say, okay, you can only provide the online gaming services to minors for no more than 3 hours and only on the weekend. So the kid can log on Friday, play an hour, Saturday, play an hour, Sunday, play an hour. That's it. And people think, oh no, China is banning gaming. No, China is not banning gaming. It's specifically internet gaming, because internet gaming you have to register. When you register on the internet, you have to register. So so this and right now Tencent actually just issue a warning, because there are already people selling their accounts to minors on Chinese social media. So minors could play games. So Tencent issue a statement that they're going to crack down on this. Anybody who caught doing this, they're gonna take actions. And again, it's not like the children are cut off forever. If you as a parent really want your children to play games for more than 3 hours on the weekend, parents could give their account to the children, and there's nothing like Chinese government is going to be able to do anything about it. So again, you still put the responsibility, on the back on the parents. Now parents have this leverage, right? Before, if anything, this is back to put the tools in the hands of parents. And if you still want your children to have more free, more time playing games, you have the option. Give your own online account to your children, allow them to play. And this does not apply to single player games, of course, because this only apply to online games. And then if you think about online games, and the game, the gaming company designed the game as these catnips to it's designed for addiction. Just like it's like cigarette companies, right? They're selling addiction. That's what they're selling. They want you to play more, spend more times, and and even spend money in game, to buy these virtual gadgets. That's they design their whole business model around this, selling you addictions. Think about that, right? And again, this Chinese regulation wasn't aiming for adults. It was aiming for minors. And I don't understand why anybody have objection to that. Like I said, there's always workaround. The parents can give their own account to children to allow them to play more. And so like they made it sound like really draconian, really drastic. But in actuality, the new regulations welcomed by many parents inside China, and I'm sure like many Western parents who would love to have it as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a great analogy that you said, catnip for humans. And it's crazy because in many ways it really is a social media video game addiction. It's designed to give us a dopamine hit, to give us a false sense of a reward, an alert in our mind that goes off every time we see that notification, every time we hit that high score in the video game, every time we get a like or a share on social media. And it's designed to get us addicted to it. Dopamine, right? It's designed to constantly seek that reward from this digital program. And I think it's great that China is recognizing this as a problem and doing something about it, because in a lot of the Western capitalist imperialist countries that are guided by libertarian thought, the free market, everyone for themselves, they're allowing this to happen. And people are literally, in a way, becoming like zombies who are addicted to dopamine, to this catnip. And I think especially with video games, it's really sad to see how, for a lot of young men in particular who are addicted to video games, it's totally altering, rewiring their brain to like something that is not even real life. And so I want to play this quick clip. This is from Dr. Kanogia. This is called How Gaming Affects Dopamine Reward Circuitry. So I just want to play a clip of this. Here's an actual doctor who has studied dopamine himself talking about how video game addiction is horrible for young people, and as an example why it's good that China is doing this sort of regulation. So let me just play a bit of this.
Over the past few years, I've had the chance to work with dozens of gamers. And the more I work with gamers, the more I started to wonder, like, what's actually going on in these people's brains? In my day job, I'm an addiction psychiatrist, so I tend to work with people who have problems with alcohol or opiates or marijuana. And one of the things that I have always found really helpful is to understand, how do these substances actually affect the chemistry in someone's brain? And so the more I work with gamers, the more I realize that gaming certainly has effects in people's brains, but those effects tend to be a little bit more subtle than what happens with biological addictions like alcohol. Alcohol, for example, directly stimulates certain receptors in your brain that give you feelings of euphoria and disinhibition and kind of slow you down a little bit, whereas gaming affects your brain in slower ways. It's not like it's not an actual chemical or physical substance that's entering your bloodstream and directly activating parts of your brain. The way that games affect your brain tend to be in smaller ways, and they tend to affect different parts of your brain at the same time. So the first kind of circuitry that I wanted to talk about today is your reward circuitry, or your dopamine circuitry. And dopamine is the primary neurotransmitter that regulates pleasure in the brain. So there's this part of the brain called the nucleus accumbens. And when dopamine activity happens there, it's one of the ways in which we feel pleasure. It's like the pleasure center of our brain. If we look at a lot of drugs of abuse like cocaine and amphetamines and things like that, those stimulant drugs tend to directly increase dopamine in our brain, which makes us feel good and euphoric. Video games usually start out that way. So if you stop and think about, why is a video game fun? Like, what makes it fun? It's because there's something going on with the way that you're interacting with the game, and there's some degree of engagement that causes this dopamine release to happen in your brain. And so that's what makes a game fun. The interesting thing is, the more I work with gamers, and you guys may feel like this happened to you too, there are three discrete phases that a gamer goes through when they play a game. The first phase tends to be when the game is actively fun. Like, the more you play, you're actually enjoying yourself. It's a lot of fun. You want to keep playing it. And then over time, we're talking more like months or years, not days, as you continue to game regularly, your brain starts to adapt to that steady degree of dopamine release. And our brain has a very normal mechanism called homeostasis, where it tries to maintain kind of a balanced state. So one of the ways that homeostasis manifests is a biological principle we call tolerance. So if you think about someone who drinks for the first time, the alcohol really, they can get drunk really quick. But if you start to drink on a regular basis, your body develops tolerance to the alcohol. It takes more and more alcohol to make you feel like you're drunk, because what's happening is your body is starting to make itself less sensitive to the effects of alcohol. And gaming is actually no different. So in the first phase of gaming, our body really hasn't acclimatized to that dopamine release, so it starts to feel really, really fun. In the second phase, we start to develop tolerance to that constant stream of dopamine. And so what happens is the game starts to be less fun. When you're playing the game, you're not having as much fun as when you used to. In the second phase, it doesn't really give us a high, but it can still remove a low. So some people, when they game, when they first start gaming, they feel like they're having fun. They feel like it's kind of like a high. And then in the second phase, even though you don't feel the high, if you're feeling bad and you start to game, you can make those negative feelings go away. So if you're feeling stressed out, if you're feeling frustrated, if you're feeling pissed off, then there's a chance that when you play the game, those feelings will kind of go into the background. And we'll talk a little bit more about emotions. So in the first phase, it's kind of giving you a positive emotion. In the second phase, it's getting rid of a negative emotion. If people continue to game, what actually happens is they enter this third phase, which is also true of biological addictions, where it doesn't even take away the negative emotions. And some of you guys feel like you're kind of trapped in your gaming. It's not even fun for you anymore, but you somehow don't know how to stop doing it. You don't even have fun with it, but it's like you just can't do anything else. And it's not like you actually enjoy your gaming, it's just you can't stop. And if you've reached that point where the game doesn't even, if you play a game for 12 hours a day and you actually stop and think, you're not even having fun during those 12 hours, that's really when you've started to develop a biological addiction.
So a biological addiction he's talking about, really scary, sad stuff to think about, because I think it's a position that a lot of young people, especially young men in the US, around the world, are stuck in: video game addiction, digital addiction. And a symptom, as Comrade Big Teal is mentioning, it sounds like video game addiction is a parallel for capitalism's profit motive. And it's exactly right. I mean, it goes hand in hand with capitalism, alienation. It's a coping mechanism, the same way I used to drink a lot. I used to do other stuff too. And it's a way to heal your wounds, right? It's because you're hurting and you're isolated or you're tired or whatever it is that you're going through, and you're using this to cope. But after a while, that high starts to go away and you just kind of become a zombie. So I wanted to ask you, Carl, about your reaction to that. How much of a problem is that in China? And also, I think Ben had an interesting question. He said, can Carl comment on the governing structures that specify, quote, cultural goals, objectives, and how they democratically determine whether cultural phenomena deviate from that objective? Is it just the CC? I think he meant the CPC. So your analysis of that, and also how China is dealing with that.
I first addressed about the gaming, and I agree completely what has been said before. I mean, the companies are just selling addiction. That's what. First, the capitalism create all these feelings of alienation, atomization, and then they're selling you the cure, the coping mechanism. And now for how China is dealing with it, I'm not actually completely happy how China is because a lot of the Chinese government regulations they're more like reactions to what's currently going on. But again, a lot of people, there's not enough visibility for a lot of people into the decision-making process of the censor board, for example. It's a bit, so people. This is one part where there's actually a lot of people are not very happy with the Chinese censor board is they don't explain their decisions very well. One thing the Chinese government is not very good at is PR, is to, the US has got that hands down how to spin a narrative. But the Chinese government is not very good at selling their, their policies, whatever. And that right now, from my understanding, it's just this group of people who has been put in charge say handling the censor board, they do respond somewhat to the public opinion. The whole drive behind the latest round of regulation, because there have been a lot of talks in both on Chinese social media and then Chinese media by both concerned parents and also by people who are alarmed that this kind of K-pop aesthetic is taking over China. So they do respond to kind of the mainstream opinions in China, but exactly how the process was. How the regulation come about, what's the debate behind that? They have not been very transparent about it. So that I do have that complaint, and it's actually many Chinese people also complain about that. They're not they want to gain more insight into that. So I hope that answers your question. And did I answer your question? I hope I wasn't.
No, definitely. I think that's a good way of putting it. And there's always room for improvement. I think things should always be one thing that my girlfriend Ophelia says that I think I definitely agree with is that you should always put things in the affirmative as to what you can do instead of what you're prohibited from doing, especially with young children, right? Instead of with young children, for example, it's better to be like, hey, let's go out hiking, or let's go and play sports at the park, or let's go and do this, as opposed to saying, stop playing video games. Stop doing this. Stop looking at your tab, and also leading by example, right? I think that's something that is important as well. Is like everybody who, even especially those of us who consider ourselves communist leftists, to represent those ideals by not being addicted to social media, not being addicted to video games, and just carrying it out in your everyday life. Same thing with health, right? Healthy eating, healthy living. Like if you're gonna tell a kid or somebody like, hey, eat your vegetables, eat your fruits, eat better, eat healthy, you better make sure that you're eating healthy and doing and exercising and all those things as well.
I want to go back to address. I want to address some of these some comments that emerge on the Western social media. They talk about the reason Chinese government is banning online gaming for children is because they want their children to be all like study hard and then become this to so they can get a leg up on the West, but not quite, because China actually also banned the private. They also put regulation on the private tutoring industry, and they also ban excessive homework for the first and second graders.
Wow, interesting.
So exactly. So they actually want the kids literally to go out and touch grass, not spending all their time playing video games or had their head buried in the homework, because there's a lot of pressure in Chinese society amongst the Chinese parents to make the kids to cram as much material as possible, and that's why there was a proliferation of private tutoring industry, which the Chinese government is now cracking down on. And that's why also China recently banned the 996, which targeted the 996, which was a lot of the big tech companies relied on. Had people working 9 hours a day, 6 days a week. The Chinese government publicly came out and said that's not healthy. Let's not do that. That's you shouldn't do that. And people may say, oh, that's paternalistic, whatever. But if Chinese government don't step in, what's there to stop these companies, big tech companies, from demanding that from their employees? You have no protection. That's what happened in the past 10 years. If you want to be employed by Tencent, if you want to be employed by Alibaba, you have to follow their company culture, which is to work your ass off, to make Jack Ma even another extra $1 billion. I mean, right. So I people that's another problem, because Western media only reports like one piece of the story. It's not like they're outright lying. They do that too, but most of the time they report like a piece of the picture, and they don't show you the whole picture.
Yeah, I think somebody used to call it distortion through omission. When you omit key facts about a story, you distort the story in its entirety, and you make it seem like it's one thing and not another thing. And I think you hit on something that's fundamental to understand is power vacuums. There's always going to be in any situation of society, whether it's a government, if a government doesn't step in to protect the people or to have certain regulations, a company will, a private company will. And that's what we see in a lot of right-wing libertarian capitalist countries where, yeah, there's small government, yeah, there's minimal state intervention, but these corporations act even more dictatorial, even more tyrannical than a government would. So I think, again, on the part of the right-wing libertarian types who don't understand how power works, they think that everyone is just a free agent and everyone has a decision to make on their own. It's like, no, whenever the government doesn't step in to have these policies to make society better for all, corporations are going to take advantage of you. And again, corporations do not have the well-being of the people at mind. They don't care if you're fat. They don't care if you're addicted to video games. They don't care if you're diabetic, if you're on junk food. They just want you to consume and to work for them.
And I want to also address that. I mean, it's actually very natural for kind of this both the libertarian and anarchist sentiment to exist in the Western societies, because most oftentimes the Western government do not have your best interests at heart. I mean, it's very natural to be suspected, to be suspicious of your government's intentions, right? And that does apply to the Western government. I mean, but what happened a lot of times, they project that, then, you know, their own understanding of their own Western society, of the Western government, project that onto China, which is a totally different setting, totally different environment. You know, it does not. The projection does not work. But most often, what we read in the Western media is projection. Is projection of everything that West has committed. You know, that gets projected into China.
100%, everything. It's total projection. Even reading the articles from The Economist and from Foreign Affairs, all these Western imperialist publications, it's like, the Chinese debt trap, how China's enslaved. I'm like, no, the IMF, the World Bank, you ever heard of those guys? The HSBC, like, yeah, they've been doing that for hundreds. They created that shit. So don't go and accuse China of doing it. And it's total projection. And again, this is something, you know, the digital addiction, this is all the K-popification, the commercialization of media. It's affecting not only China, but the whole world, everywhere. Even in Latin America and the Caribbean as well, you see like people's traditional garbs or outfits, indigenous customs, clothing being wiped away with this shitty condensed pop reggaeton genre that's being imposed on everything. So it's something that's very fascinating, but I'm also optimistic and hopeful that measures like this being implemented by China to limit consumption of addiction, to get people outside to play, to learn, to build. I think that's something that is very inspiring. And even studying Xi Jinping's life as somebody who grew up in the coast and then went to the countryside and got his hands dirty, worked in the farms alongside the peasants. And I can see that personally changed him as a human being to work with his hands and work with families out in the field, to come back. I think that's something that is good for people in general to do. I don't think it's healthy to be locked in an office or a room in an urban area for hours, even though I'm not going to lie, I do that too at some points, and I'm trying to get better at it. But, you know, little by little, right? It's a process. It's a dialectical process. And I think China's taking the correct steps to guide the society to better human living. Because trust me, if it was up to Amazon, if it was up to all these companies, we just be huge fat slobs ordering everything to us, playing video games 24 hours a day. So I don't know, Carl, if you have any last thoughts before we head out.
No, that's good. I mean, you cover. I think we cover a wide ranging of topics on the show, and thank you for inviting me again.
No problem. Yeah, it's always really great to talk to you, and I hope we can do another stream soon about China and maybe even DPRK. I've been seeing. I forget her name. That the fact you posted something that was hilarious.
Yomi Park on Joe Rogan experience. Oh my goodness.
Oh my God. Maybe we could do a whole episode on that, because I was watching that and I was just like, oh my God, that was disgusting. But Carl, it's been a pleasure, man. Again, everybody, make sure to go and subscribe to Silk and Steel podcast. Link is in the description. It focuses on China and surrounding regions, history, culture, and politics. Carl, it's been a real pleasure, man. Hope you have a great weekend and take care, brother. Okay? Peace out.
You too. Bye-bye.